What if the person you love most sees the world completely differently, and one day, you realize love might not be enough? In this story, I share how my marriage was tested by opposite beliefs, silent conflicts, and emotional distance. And how I almost gave up, not just on love, but on myself. But something unexpected changed everything, in the smallest, quietest way. A question that broke me. You don't need to answer that right away. Just sit with it for a second. Because if you've ever felt tired in a relationship, confused, or quietly disappointed without knowing exactly why, then you already understand more than you think. I used to believe something very simple. Love is enough. That's it. If two people care about each other, everything else can be solved. It sounds nice, right? Clean. Hopeful. Almost like something you'd hear in a movie and think, yeah, that makes sense. But real life doesn't follow movie scripts. Real life is slower, messier, and sometimes, uncomfortably honest. I'm telling you this because there was a time, not long ago, when I sat alone in my own living room, looking at someone I loved, and felt like we were speaking two completely different languages. Not just English. I mean something deeper. Beliefs. Values. The way we see right and wrong. The way we react to stress. Even the way we define a good life. And here's the strange part, from the outside, everything looked fine. If someone walked into our home, they would probably say, you two are doing great. We had routines. We had conversations. We had plans for the future. There were smiles, small jokes, everyday moments that looked normal. But inside those normal moments, something didn't feel right. Have you ever had that feeling? Like everything is technically okay, but emotionally, something is off? Like your brain is trying to explain it away, but your gut just won't agree? That was me. At first, I ignored it. Because ignoring is easy. Your brain actually prefers it. There's a small psychological trick happening here. When something threatens your idea of a happy life, your mind doesn't want to face it. It quietly tells you, it's not a big deal. Don't overthink. So I didn't. I told myself, we're just different. I told myself, every couple has problems. I told myself, this will pass. But differences don't disappear when you ignore them. They grow. Slowly. Quietly. Like background noise you don't notice, until one day, it's too loud to ignore. And the truth? Our differences weren't small. We didn't just disagree about what to eat or what movie to watch. We disagreed on deeper things. How to handle conflict. What matters more, logic or emotion? When to speak, and when to stay silent. Even what respect looks like in a conversation. Let me say that again, slowly, because this is important for both relationships and your English listening practice. We were not just different. We were opposite. Now imagine trying to build a peaceful life with someone whose natural reactions are the complete opposite of yours. When you want to talk, they want space. When you need emotional support, they offer solutions. When you think something is serious, they think it's small. At first, it feels like balance. Later, it feels like distance. And here's where things get even more interesting. There's a concept in psychology called confirmation bias. It means your brain looks for evidence to prove what you already believe. So once I started feeling that something was wrong, my brain began collecting small moments to confirm it. A short answer became he doesn't care. Silence became he is ignoring me. A different opinion became he doesn't understand me at all. But what if that wasn't the full truth? What if the real problem wasn't just our differences, but the way I was interpreting them? I didn't ask that question back then. I was too busy feeling hurt. And if you're honest, you've probably been there too. When emotions are strong, logic becomes very quiet. You don't analyze, you react. You don't listen, you defend. That's exactly what I did. And slowly, without any big dramatic moment, the distance between us grew. Not because we stopped loving each other, but because we stopped understanding each other. Now here's the part that surprised me the most. It wasn't one big fight that almost broke us. It was the small, everyday misunderstandings. A sentence said too quickly. A reaction that felt cold. A moment where one of us needed connection, and the other didn't notice. These are the things that don't look serious, but they are. Because relationships don't usually break in one moment. They wear down over time. Like water slowly shaping stone. And somewhere in that quiet process, I started asking myself a question I never thought I would ask. Did I make a mistake? That question is dangerous. Not because it's always true, but because once it appears, it changes how you see everything. Suddenly, every difference feels bigger. Every conflict feels heavier. Every silence feels longer. And that's when something inside me began to shift. Not in a dramatic, movie-style way. No sudden realization. No perfect answer. Just a quiet feeling that if I didn't understand what was really happening, I might lose something important. Not just the relationship, but a part of myself. So I did something simple, but uncomfortable. I stopped trying to win. And I started trying to understand. Not him. Not yet. Myself. Because sometimes, the biggest misunderstanding in your life is not between you and another person. It's between you and your own expectations. And trust me, what I discovered next changed everything I thought I knew about love, communication, and even the way I listen to English. But we're not there yet. Because before anything could change, something had to break first. And it did. Life looks perfect outside. Have you ever noticed how the happiest looking lives are sometimes the hardest to explain? From the outside, my life looked good. Not perfect, but stable. Predictable in a way that makes people feel safe. We had our daily routines, shared responsibilities, and those small, ordinary moments that most people would call normal life. Morning coffee. Short conversations. Quiet evenings. If someone asked me, "How's your marriage?" I could easily say, "It's fine." And technically, that wouldn't be a lie. But here's the problem with the word fine. It hides everything. It hides confusion. It hides disappointment. And sometimes, it hides loneliness. Now let me tell you something interesting about the human brain. It doesn't like conflict between what you show and what you feel. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. When your outside world says, everything is okay, but your inside world says, something is wrong, your brain gets uncomfortable. So what does it do? It tries to fix the feeling, not the reality. That means instead of asking, what's actually wrong? You start saying things like, maybe I'm just overthinking. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe this is just how relationships are. I said all of those things. More than once. Because admitting something is wrong is scary. But admitting that you don't understand why it's wrong? That's even harder. And this is where things became quietly complicated in my life. You see, we weren't fighting every day. There was no constant drama, no loud arguments that would make you say, "Oh, something is clearly broken here." Instead, it was calm. Too calm. And that kind of calm can be misleading. Because sometimes, silence is not peace. Sometimes, silence is distance. Let me slow this down for a second. This part is important, especially if you're using this story to practice your English listening. Not all quiet moments are healthy. Some quiet moments mean connection. Some quiet moments mean disconnection. And I didn't know the difference anymore. There were evenings when we sat in the same room, doing our own things. No conflict. No tension you could clearly point to. But also, no real connection. It felt like we were living parallel lives. Close, but not truly together. And the strange part? This didn't happen suddenly. It built over time. A missed conversation here. A short reply there. A moment where one of us needed attention, and the other didn't notice. Individually, these moments are small. Easy to ignore. But your brain doesn't forget them. It stores them quietly, like little emotional notes. And over time, those notes start to form a pattern. A pattern that says, something is missing. Now here's where things get even more interesting. Because of our opposite beliefs, we didn't even agree on what the problem was. Think about that for a second. I felt distance. He felt normal. I wanted more emotional connection. He thought things were already stable. I saw silence as a problem. He saw silence as peace. Same situation. Completely different interpretations. This is something many people don't realize. Conflict doesn't always come from what is happening. It comes from how each person defines what is happening. And when two people define the same moment in opposite ways, you don't just have a disagreement. You have two different realities. Living in the same house. Now imagine trying to solve a problem when both people don't even agree that a problem exists. That's where we were. And this is the part where I started feeling something I didn't expect in my own relationship. Loneliness. Not the kind where you're physically alone. The kind where you're next to someone, and still feel unseen. That feeling is subtle, but powerful. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It shows up in small thoughts like, why doesn't he notice this? Why do I feel like I care more? Is this just how it's going to be? And once those questions start, they don't just disappear. They repeat. Quietly. Constantly. Now, if you've ever been in that space, you know how confusing it is. Because nothing is clearly wrong, but nothing feels fully right either. It's like trying to explain a headache that doesn't hurt enough to stop you, but doesn't go away either. So what do most people do in that situation? They wait. They hope it fixes itself. They tell themselves, maybe tomorrow will feel different. I did the same. But here's the truth I learned the hard way. Unclear problems don't fix themselves. They deepen. And while I was waiting for clarity, something else was happening without me noticing. The gap between us was growing. Not dramatically. Not obviously. Just enough. Enough to change how we talked. Enough to change how we listened. Enough to slowly turn comfort into distance. And the most dangerous part? We were both still trying, in our own ways. But because our beliefs were so different, our efforts didn't meet in the middle. They passed each other. Like two people waving in the dark, but never actually seeing each other. That's when I started realizing something uncomfortable. Maybe love is not just about caring. Maybe it's about understanding how the other person experiences the world. And if you don't understand that, you can love someone deeply and still feel completely disconnected. But I still didn't know how to fix it. Not yet. Because before you can fix anything, you have to face something you've been avoiding. And in my case, that moment came in a way I didn't expect at all. It didn't start with a big fight. It started with something small. That turned into something we couldn't ignore anymore. Opposite beliefs, same home. Let me ask you something a little uncomfortable. What if the problem in your relationship isn't that you don't love each other, but that you don't see the world the same way? Not a little different. I mean fundamentally different. Because that's where my story really begins. You see, it took me a long time to admit this, not to him, but to myself. We weren't just a bit different. We were built on completely opposite beliefs. And at first, that felt exciting. New. Even attractive. He was calm when I was emotional. He was logical when I followed my feelings. He believed in structure. I believed in flexibility. At the beginning, it felt like balance. But here's the twist nobody tells you. What feels like balance in the beginning can feel like resistance later. Because balance requires understanding. Without understanding, it becomes friction. Let me slow that down for a second. This is important, not just for relationships, but also for how you understand English in real life. Same word. Different meaning. Same situation. Different interpretation. That's exactly what was happening to us. Take something simple. A normal conversation. If I said, I feel upset today, what I really meant was, I need connection. I need you to listen. But what he heard was, there is a problem. Let me fix it. So he would respond with solutions. Maybe you should do this. Try to think about it differently. It's not that serious. And in his mind, he was helping. But in my mind, he wasn't listening. Now imagine this happening again. And again. And again. Same pattern. Same confusion. Two people trying to care, but missing each other completely. This is where psychology becomes very real in everyday life. There's something called emotional needs versus problem-solving mode. Some people connect by listening. Others connect by fixing. Neither is wrong. But when these two styles meet without awareness, it creates distance. Because one person feels unheard. And the other feels unappreciated. That was us. And here's the part that made it harder. We didn't even argue about it clearly. Because from his perspective, everything made sense. He was being practical. Helpful. Efficient. From my perspective, something was missing. Warmth. Presence. Emotional understanding. Same moment. Two completely different experiences. And when that keeps happening, your brain starts building a story. A quiet one at first. He doesn't get me. We're too different. Maybe we're not right for each other. Now here's where things get a little dangerous. Because your brain doesn't just create stories, it starts believing them. Even if they are incomplete. Even if they are slightly wrong. And once that belief settles in, you begin to see everything through that lens. A short answer becomes distance. A neutral reaction becomes coldness. A disagreement becomes proof that you don't belong together. This is called pattern recognition. Your brain is trying to protect you by predicting what comes next. But sometimes, it protects you from the wrong thing. Because instead of helping you understand the other person, it pushes you further away from them. And I didn't realize I was doing this. Not at first. I thought I was just reacting to reality. But slowly, something inside me started to feel tired. Not tired from fighting. Tired from not being understood. That kind of tired is different. It's quiet. It doesn't explode. It just sits there, slowly draining your energy. And here's something most people won't say out loud. You can love someone deeply and still feel exhausted by the relationship. That realization hit me harder than any argument. Because I didn't want to feel that way. I wanted us to work. I wanted us to make sense. But the more I tried to explain how I felt, the more complicated things became. Because explanation is not the same as understanding. Let me say that again, slowly. Explaining is not understanding. I could use all the right words. I could speak clearly. I could repeat myself. But if the other person processes the world differently, the message changes. And that's when I started noticing something I had ignored before. It wasn't just about beliefs. It was about how we communicate those beliefs. Tone. Timing. Emotion. Silence. These things matter more than vocabulary. And ironically, this is where my English learning quietly became part of the story. Because when you're learning a language, you realize something powerful. Understanding words is easy. Understanding meaning is harder. And I was facing both at the same time. Trying to understand a person. And trying to understand a language. Sometimes I would think, maybe if I could just say it better, he would understand. But deep down, I knew the truth was more complicated than that. It wasn't just about better words. It was about different worlds. And living in the same home didn't change that. In fact, it made it more visible. Every day, in small moments, I saw how different we really were. How we made decisions. How we handled stress. How we reacted to silence. And slowly, a question started forming in my mind. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quiet and persistent. How far can love stretch before it breaks? I didn't have the answer yet. But I was getting closer to something else. A moment. A moment where all these small differences would finally turn into something we couldn't ignore anymore. And when that moment came, it didn't look like a disaster. At least, not at first. It started with something small. Something ordinary. Something that could happen in any home, on any day. But what happened next changed everything. The small things became big. It didn't start with a big fight. No shouting. No dramatic moment where everything suddenly fell apart. It started with something so small, you would probably ignore it. That's exactly what I did. It was an ordinary evening. Nothing special. The kind of moment you don't remember until it becomes important later. I had a long day, the kind that leaves your mind a little heavy and your emotions closer to the surface. So I did something simple. I tried to talk. Not a deep conversation. Not anything complicated. Just one of those quiet moments where you hope the other person will notice how you feel, without you needing to explain everything. I had a hard day, I said. That's it. A simple sentence. Now pause for a second. This is where things get interesting, especially if you're learning English. Because in English, like in life, simple sentences can carry complex meanings. I had a hard day doesn't always mean I want advice. Sometimes it means I need comfort. Sometimes it means just listen. But remember what I told you before. We didn't interpret things the same way. So when he heard that sentence, his brain did exactly what it was trained to do. He moved into problem-solving mode. What happened? He asked. Logical. Direct. Efficient. And then, before I even finished explaining, he started offering solutions. You should try this. Maybe next time, do it differently. It's not that serious. Now, if you listen to those sentences alone, they don't sound wrong. In fact, they sound helpful. But here's the truth that changed everything for me. Help is not always what people need. Sometimes, they just need to feel understood. And in that moment, I didn't feel understood. I felt dismissed. Now here's where the situation shifts, from small to significant. Because instead of saying what I actually felt, I reacted. A little colder. A little quieter. Okay, I said. One word. But that one word carried frustration, disappointment, and something deeper I didn't even recognize yet. He noticed the change. Why are you reacting like that? He asked. And just like that, the small moment became something bigger. Not because of the situation, but because of the interpretation. Let me slow this down. This is the part most people miss. Conflict doesn't grow from events. It grows from meanings. I meant, I need connection. He heard, there is a problem to fix. He meant, I'm trying to help. I felt, you don't understand me. Same conversation. For different meanings. This is how small things become big. And once that shift happens, your brain moves fast. It starts connecting the present moment to the past. This always happens. You never listen. Why is it always like this? Now suddenly, it's not about one conversation anymore. It's about everything. And that's exactly what happened. The tone changed. The energy shifted. And before I knew it, we weren't talking about my day anymore. We were arguing about us. Not loudly. Not aggressively. But in that controlled, tense way where both people are trying to stay calm, while slowly losing patience. And here's something important to understand, especially if you're learning communication in English or in relationships. Staying calm doesn't always mean things are okay. Sometimes, it just means both people are holding back. And when people hold back too much, pressure builds. That pressure doesn't disappear. It waits. And then it shows up in moments like this. I remember thinking, in that exact moment. Why is this so hard? Not the conversation. The connection. Why was something so simple, feeling understood, so difficult between two people who cared about each other? And then something even more uncomfortable crossed my mind. What if this never changes? That thought is heavy. Because it doesn't just question the moment. It questions the future. And once your mind goes there, everything feels different. Every small disagreement feels like a warning sign. Every misunderstanding feels like a pattern. Every silence feels like distance. That's when I realized something I didn't want to admit. This wasn't just about one evening. This was a pattern. A quiet, repeating loop we didn't know how to break. And here's the part that surprised me the most. We were both trying. He was trying, in his way. I was trying, in mine. But because our beliefs about communication were so different, our efforts didn't connect. It was like speaking two different emotional languages. Close, but not compatible. And the more we tried, the more frustrated we became. Not because we didn't care, but because we didn't feel seen. That's when the distance started feeling real. Not imagined. Not temporary. Real. And here's something I want you to notice. This is subtle, but powerful. At no point in this moment did anyone say, "I don't love you." Love was still there. But understanding was missing. And without understanding, love starts to feel fragile. Like something that could disappear if you touch it the wrong way. That night didn't end with a solution. It ended with silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. The kind that leaves questions in your mind long after the conversation ends. And as I sat there, replaying everything in my head, one realization slowly became impossible to ignore. And that scared me more than any argument ever could. Because distance doesn't feel like a problem at first. It feels like adaptation. And by the time you notice it, it's already part of your life. But what I didn't know yet was that this small moment was only the beginning. Because something bigger was coming. Something we couldn't ignore. Something that would force both of us to face everything we had been avoiding. And when it happened, there was no more pretending everything was fine. The argument that changed us. Here's the thing nobody tells you about relationships. The moment that changes everything rarely looks important at first. It doesn't arrive with a warning. It doesn't feel dramatic in the beginning. It just shows up, like a normal day. And then suddenly, it isn't normal anymore. That moment for us started on a quiet weekend. No stress from work. No outside pressure. Just the two of us, at home, doing something simple, talking about the future. Now, the future sounds like a safe topic, right? Plans. Goals. Ideas. But here's what I didn't realize back then. Talking about the future is actually one of the fastest ways to reveal your deepest beliefs. And ours? They didn't match. Not even close. It started with a simple question. What do you think is most important for our life in the next few years? A normal question. Calm tone. No tension. But the answers opened everything. I talked about emotional stability. Connection. Building a life that feels meaningful, not just successful. I spoke about time together, about being present, about creating a space where we both feel understood. He listened. Then he answered. For him, the focus was different. Structure. Progress. Clear plans. Efficiency. Building something strong and stable in a practical sense, career, financial security, long-term goals. Again, nothing wrong with that. In fact, both perspectives are valid. But here's where the shift happened. We didn't just have different answers. We believed our answers were the right ones. Let that sink in. Because this is where disagreement turns into conflict. Not when people think differently, but when they believe the other way is wrong. And without saying it directly, that's exactly what happened. I started feeling like he didn't value emotional connection enough. He started feeling like I wasn't being realistic. Same conversation. Two silent judgments. Now here's the psychological part, this is important. When your core beliefs are challenged, your brain reacts as if it's under threat. Not physical danger, but identity danger. Because your beliefs are part of who you are. So what does your brain do? It defends. Not gently. Not logically. But quickly. And that's when the conversation changed. The tone became sharper. The pauses became longer. The words became more precise, but also more defensive. You don't understand what really matters, I said. You're overcomplicating things, he replied. Notice something? We stopped talking about the future. We started talking about each other. That's when things escalated. Not loudly, but deeply. Because now, it wasn't just about plans anymore. It was about identity. About whose way of seeing the world made more sense. And here's where it became the moment that changed everything. I said something I didn't plan to say. Something honest, but heavy. Sometimes I feel like you don't really see me. Silence. Not a short pause. A long one. The kind that makes your heart beat a little faster. Because once those words are out, you can't take them back. He looked at me, confused. What does that even mean? He asked. And that question, simple, direct, hit me harder than I expected. Because in that moment, I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't know how to explain it. Not clearly. Not in a way he would understand. And this is where language, real communication, becomes more than just vocabulary. You can know all the words in English. You can speak clearly. But if the other person doesn't experience the world the same way, your message changes. That's exactly what was happening. I tried to explain. I used different words. Different examples. I need you to listen more. I need you to feel what I'm saying. I need more connection. And in his mind, he was listening. He was responding. He was trying. So from his perspective, my words didn't make sense. And from my perspective, his reactions didn't either. This is the moment most people don't talk about. When both people are trying, but both feel like the other isn't. That's where frustration turns into something heavier. Doubt. Not loud. Not obvious. Just a quiet question in your mind. Are we actually right for each other? That question changes everything. Because once it appears, it doesn't leave easily. It stays in the background, quietly influencing how you see every interaction. And that's exactly what happened to me. As the conversation continued, something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not sadness. Something colder. Distance. I stopped trying to explain. I stopped trying to convince. And for the first time, I felt like giving up. Not dramatically. Not with tears or strong words. Just a quiet thought. Maybe this is just who we are. Two people who care, but don't understand each other. And here's the part that scared me the most. He felt it too. I could see it. Not in what he said, but in what he didn't say. The conversation slowed down. The energy dropped. And then, it stopped. No resolution. No clear ending. Just silence. But this time, the silence felt different. Heavier. More real. Because now, we both knew something we hadn't fully admitted before. This wasn't just a small problem. This was a fundamental difference. And for the first time, the question became impossible to ignore. Is love enough when beliefs don't match? I didn't have the answer. Not yet. But I knew one thing for sure. If we continued like this, something would eventually break. Not loudly. Not suddenly. But quietly, over time. And that's when the most unexpected part of this story began. Because after that argument, we didn't fix anything. We didn't find a solution. We didn't even talk about it again right away. Instead, something else happened. Something that felt small again. But this time, it changed everything in a completely different way. Silence was worse than words. You'd think after a big argument, people either fix things or break. But there's a third option. And honestly, it's the most dangerous one. Nothing happens. No resolution. No clear ending. Just silence. That's exactly where we were. After that conversation about the future, the one that quietly shook everything, we didn't argue again. Not the next day. Not the next week. We just stopped going there. And at first, it felt like peace. No tension. No conflict. No uncomfortable discussions. But here's the truth most people don't realize. Avoiding conflict doesn't create peace. It creates distance. Let me slow that down, because this is where everything started to change for me. There are two kinds of silence. One feels safe. The other feels empty. And when you're in it, you know the difference. We were living in the second one. Our conversations became shorter. More practical. Did you eat? What time are you coming back? Don't forget this. Functional. Efficient. Easy. But something important was missing. Emotion. Connection. Meaning. It was like we were managing a life together, instead of actually living it together. Now here's where it gets interesting, especially if you're learning English through real-life stories. In communication, what you don't say often matters more than what you say. And silence? Silence is not neutral. Silence sends a message. Sometimes it says, I'm calm. Sometimes it says, I'm tired. And sometimes, it says, I've stopped trying. I didn't say that out loud. But I started feeling it. Not all at once. Just small moments. Like when I wanted to share something, and then decided not to. Or when I noticed something bothering me, and chose to ignore it. Or when I felt that quiet question again. What's the point of explaining, if nothing changes? That question is powerful. Because once it appears, your behavior starts to change. You talk less. You expect less. You feel less. And here's the psychological part. Your brain is trying to protect you. When it believes effort doesn't lead to results, it reduces effort to avoid frustration. It's efficient. But in relationships, it's dangerous. Because connection requires effort. Without effort, distance grows. Now here's the part that surprised me. He wasn't ignoring me. He wasn't being cold on purpose. He thought things were getting better. Because from his perspective, there was less conflict, less tension, less disagreement. And for him, that meant improvement. But for me, it felt like we were slowly disappearing from each other's lives. Same situation. Two completely different interpretations. Again. This is what opposite beliefs look like in real life. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just quiet misalignment, repeating over and over. And the more it repeated, the more normal it started to feel. That's the scariest part. Humans adapt quickly. Even to things that aren't good for them. What felt uncomfortable at first, becomes familiar. And what becomes familiar, starts to feel acceptable. I remember one night very clearly. We were sitting in the same room. Same space. Same time. But mentally? Completely separate. He was focused on his thing. I was on mine. No tension. No problem you could point to. Just silence. And suddenly, a thought came into my mind. Clear. Sharp. Unexpected. If this is what our life feels like now, what will it feel like in 5 years? That question stayed with me. Because it wasn't emotional. It was logical. And logic can be very honest. I started imagining the future. More silence. More distance. More moments where nothing is wrong, but nothing feels right. And that's when something shifted inside me again. Not frustration this time. Awareness. A quiet realization. This isn't just a phase. This is a pattern. And patterns don't change by themselves. Now here's where most people do one of two things. They either ignore it. Or they explode. But I did something different. Not because I was smarter. But because I was tired. Tired of misunderstanding. Tired of overthinking. Tired of feeling disconnected in my own relationship. So instead of reacting, I started observing. Not him. Myself. The way I listened. The way I reacted. The way I expected him to understand things I never clearly explained. And here's the uncomfortable truth I had to face. I was waiting for him to change. Without fully understanding myself. That realization is not easy. Because it shifts responsibility. Not blame. Responsibility. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. So I asked myself a simple question. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Just honest. What if the problem isn't just our differences, but the way I respond to those differences? That question didn't fix anything immediately. But it opened something. A small space. A different way of thinking. And in that space, something new began. Not a solution. Not a big change. Just a small shift in how I listened. And that small shift was the beginning of everything that came next. Because what I discovered after that was not about changing him. It was about understanding something I had completely missed before. Something simple, but powerful. And once I saw it, I couldn't go back to the way things were. Learning to truly listen. Let me tell you something that sounds simple, but completely changed my life. Listening is not the same as understanding. You hear words every day. You recognize sentences. You respond. But real listening? That's something else. And the moment I realized that, everything started to shift. Not outside. Inside. Because up until that point, I thought I was listening. I heard everything he said. I could repeat his words. I could even predict his responses. But I wasn't actually trying to understand how he thinks. I was listening to reply. Not to understand. Now pause for a second. This applies not only to relationships, but also to how you learn English. When you listen to English, do you really understand, or are you just translating quickly in your head? Because those are two very different processes. And I was doing the same thing in my relationship. I was translating his words into my meaning. Not his. So when he said something like, "It's not a big deal," what I heard was, "You're overreacting." But what he actually meant was, "I don't want you to feel stressed." Same sentence. Completely different emotional meaning. And that's when something clicked. Not dramatically. Just quietly. What if I've been misunderstanding him this whole time? That thought was uncomfortable. Because it challenged everything I believed about the situation. But it also opened a door. A small one. So I tried something different. The next time we talked, I didn't focus on what I wanted to say. I focused on how he said things. His tone. His timing. His intention. And something interesting happened. I started noticing patterns. When he gave solutions, it wasn't because he didn't care. It was because that's how he shows care. When he stayed calm, it wasn't because he felt nothing. It was because he processes emotions differently. When he didn't react strongly, it wasn't distance. It was stability. Now this doesn't mean everything suddenly became easy. Not at all. Understanding doesn't remove differences. But it changes how you experience them. Let me say that again, slowly. Understanding doesn't remove differences. It changes your reaction to them. And reaction is everything. Because your reaction determines whether a moment becomes connection or conflict. This is where something powerful happened. Instead of reacting immediately, I started pausing. Just a few seconds. But those seconds made a difference. There's a concept in neuroscience called the response gap. It's the space between what happens and how you respond. Most people don't use it. They react instantly. But when you slow down, even a little, you give your brain time to choose a better response. And that's exactly what I started doing. When he spoke, I didn't interrupt. When I didn't understand, I asked. Not aggressively. Not defensively. Just, simply. What do you mean by that? That question sounds basic. But it changed everything. Because instead of assuming, I started clarifying. Instead of reacting, I started exploring. And slowly, something shifted between us. Not dramatically. But noticeably. The conversations felt lighter. Less tense. Less like a competition. More like two people trying to understand each other. And here's something unexpected. My English started improving too. Not because I studied more. But because I listened differently. I stopped trying to translate everything perfectly. I focused on meaning, context, emotion. And when you do that, language becomes easier. Because real communication is not about perfect grammar. It's about clear understanding. Now here's the part one didn't expect. When I changed the way I listened, he changed the way he responded. Not because I asked him to, but because the energy was different. When people feel understood, they naturally open up more. They explain more. They connect more. And that's exactly what started happening. He began to explain his thoughts more clearly. He asked me questions. He noticed things he didn't notice before. Not all the time. But enough. Enough to feel a difference. Enough to give me something I hadn't felt in a while. Hope. But here's the important part. This wasn't a perfect transformation. We still had misunderstandings. We still had moments where things didn't connect. But now, those moments didn't feel like proof that we were wrong for each other. They felt like opportunities to understand better. That shift is small, but powerful. Because when you stop seeing problems as threats, you start seeing them as information. And information can be used. That's when I realized something I wish I had understood earlier. Communication is not about saying more. It's about understanding better. And understanding requires effort. Not from one person. From both. But someone has to start. And in this case, it was me. Not because I was right. Not because I was stronger. But because I was ready to see things differently. And that decision started a chain reaction I didn't expect. Because once you change how you listen, you start changing how you speak. And once you change how you speak, you start changing the entire dynamic of your relationship. But we weren't there yet. Because understanding is only the first step. What came next was about action. Small actions. Simple habits. Things that looked insignificant, but ended up saving something much bigger than I realized at the time. Small habits, big shifts. Here's something most people underestimate. Big changes in relationships rarely come from big decisions. They come from small habits. Quiet ones. Repeated daily. Almost invisible. And honestly, at first, I didn't believe that. I thought if something was this complicated, this emotional, this confusing, it needed a big solution. A deep conversation. A clear answer. Something dramatic that would fix everything. But nothing like that happened. Instead, everything started changing in the smallest ways possible. So small, I almost didn't notice. It began with something simple. Timing. I stopped trying to talk about important things at the wrong moments. Before, I would bring up feelings when they appeared immediately. It felt honest. Real. But I didn't realize something important. Just because something matters to you right now, doesn't mean the other person is ready to receive it. So I started paying attention. When was he relaxed? When was he focused? When was he open? And when I chose the right moment to speak, the same conversation felt completely different. Same words. Better timing. Better result. Now here's another small shift. Tone. This one is subtle, but powerful. I used to think what I said mattered more than how I said it. But your brain and his brain react to tone first. Before logic. Before meaning. So even a correct sentence can create conflict if the tone feels sharp. I started softening my tone. Not fake. Not forced. Just calmer. Slower. More intentional. Instead of saying, "You never listen," I tried, "I feel better when you listen to me like this." Same message. Different impact. This is something you can also use when learning English. You don't need complicated vocabulary to communicate well. Simple words, clear tone, and the right intention are enough. And honestly, that's real English. Now here's where things became interesting. I added one more small habit. Pausing. Not just when listening, but before speaking. There's a difference. Before, I reacted quickly. Emotion first, words second. Now, I gave myself a few seconds. Just enough to ask. What do I actually want from this moment? Do I want to be right? Or do I want to connect? Those two goals often lead to very different conversations. And when I chose connection, everything changed. Not instantly, but consistently. And consistency is where real change happens. Now here's a habit that felt almost too simple to matter. But it worked. I started acknowledging small things. Not big gestures. Just small ones. Thank you for doing that. I noticed that. I appreciate this. At first, it felt unnecessary. But here's the psychology behind it. Your brain is wired to notice problems more than positive moments. It's called negativity bias. It helps you survive, but it doesn't help your relationship. So when you intentionally notice positive things, you rebalance your perspective. And something interesting happens. The other person feels seen. And when people feel seen, they show up differently. That's exactly what I started noticing. He became more responsive. More present. More aware. Not because I asked him to change. But because the environment changed. And people respond to environments. Now here's the part that surprised me the most. None of these habits were dramatic. No big conversations. No emotional breakthroughs. Just small, repeated actions. And slowly, the distance started shrinking. Not disappearing completely. But enough to feel a shift. We started talking more. Not longer, but better. We started understanding each other more. Not perfectly, but honestly. And for the first time in a while, things didn't feel stuck. They felt possible. Now let me connect this to something you might not expect. This is exactly how language learning works too. You don't improve your English in one big moment. You improve through small, consistent habits. Listening a little every day. Speaking a little every day. Understanding a little more each time. And over time, it adds up. That's what was happening in my relationship. We weren't fixing everything at once. We were building something new, step by step. Now here's the truth. Small habits don't feel powerful in the moment. They feel ordinary. Sometimes even boring. But over time, they change everything. And that's when I realized something important. Maybe relationships don't fail because of big problems. Maybe they slowly break because of small habits we ignore. And if that's true, then maybe they can also be rebuilt. the same way. Through small habits we choose. That idea changed how I saw everything. Not just love. Not just communication. But effort. Because effort doesn't have to be big to be meaningful. It just has to be consistent. And we were finally becoming consistent. But here's the thing. Just when things started to feel better, life tested us again. In a different way. A deeper way. Because improving communication is one thing. But building a life together, with real responsibilities, real pressure, and real decisions? That's something else entirely. And that next stage would show me whether these small changes were enough. Or if we still had something bigger to face. Marriage is not about winning. Let me tell you something that sounds obvious, but took me a long time to truly understand. Marriage is not about winning. Not winning arguments. Not proving you're right. Not having the better way of thinking. Because the moment one person wins, the relationship loses. And I didn't realize how much I was trying to win, until I stopped. It's strange, right? You don't wake up and say, today, I'm going to win against my partner. No one thinks like that. But it shows up in small ways. Correcting their words. Defending your opinion quickly. Feeling uncomfortable when they don't agree with you. That was me. Not aggressively. Not obviously. But quietly, consistently. And here's the truth. When two people have opposite beliefs, the natural instinct is to protect your own. Because your beliefs feel like truth. Not preference. Truth. So when someone challenges them even indirectly, it feels personal. And your brain reacts. It prepares arguments. It searches for evidence. It tries to win. But here's the problem. In a relationship, winning creates distance. Because connection doesn't grow from being right. It grows from being understood. That shift, from winning to understanding, was not easy for me. Because letting go of being right feels like losing. At least at first. There were moments where I wanted to say, no, you're wrong. That's not how it works. And sometimes, I was probably right. But I started asking myself a different question. What matters more right now, being correct or being connected? That question changed everything. Because it forced me to pause. To choose. To become intentional instead of reactive. Now here's something important. This doesn't mean I stopped expressing my thoughts. Not at all. I still spoke. I still shared my perspective. But the way I did it changed. Instead of saying, you don't understand, I tried. Can I show you how I see this? That small change matters. Because one closes the conversation. The other opens it. And when conversations stay open, connection has a chance. Now here's where things became real. We started facing everyday decisions together. Not big dramatic ones. Simple things. How to spend time. How to handle stress. How to respond to unexpected situations. And this is where our differences showed up again. But this time, something was different. We weren't trying to win anymore. We were trying to align. Not perfectly. But intentionally. There's a concept in psychology called shared meaning. It means two people don't need to think the same way. But they need to create a common understanding of what matters. That's what we started building. Slowly. Through conversations that didn't aim to prove anything. Just to understand. Now here's something I didn't expect. When I stopped trying to win, I started feeling lighter. Less tension. Less pressure. Less need to control the outcome. Because winning requires energy. Understanding creates energy. And that energy changed the dynamic between us. He became more open. More willing to listen. More interested in my perspective. Not because I demanded it. But because he didn't feel attacked. That's a key point. People don't listen well when they feel judged. They defend. But when they feel safe, they open. And safety doesn't come from perfect words. It comes from intention. Now let's connect this to something practical, especially for your English learning. When you speak English, do you try to be perfect, or do you try to be understood? Because those are two different goals. And often, trying to be perfect creates pressure. But focusing on being understood creates flow. That's exactly what happened in my relationship. We stopped trying to communicate perfectly. We focused on understanding each other better. And that made everything easier. Not perfect. But easier. Now here's the turning point. One day, in the middle of a simple conversation, I noticed something. We disagreed. Completely. Same topic. Opposite opinions. But this time, it didn't feel like a problem. There was no tension. No frustration. No need to convince. Just two people, seeing things differently. And somehow, still connected. That moment felt small. But it was huge. Because for the first time, I realized. Differences don't destroy relationships. The way we handle differences, does. That realization changed how I saw everything. Not just our past conflicts. But our future. Because now, instead of asking, are we too different? I started asking, can we handle our differences in a healthy way? That's a better question. A more useful one. And the answer was slowly becoming yes. But life wasn't done testing us. Because understanding each other as two individuals is one thing. Building a family together? That's a completely different level. More responsibility. More pressure. More decisions that actually matter. And that next stage would show us whether what we built was strong enough. Or if our differences would return in a new form. And trust me, they did. Just not in the way I expected. Building a family together. Here's where everything becomes real. It's one thing to understand each other in quiet conversations. It's another thing to build a life together every single day. Because life doesn't pause so you can figure things out. It keeps moving. Bills. Responsibilities. Decisions. Unexpected problems. And suddenly, it's not just about how you feel. It's about how you act, together. That's where our relationship entered a new phase. Not dramatic. Not announced. Just real. We started making decisions that actually shaped our daily life. How we spend our time. How we handle stress. How we respond when things don't go as planned. And this is where something interesting happened. Our differences didn't disappear. They showed up again. But this time, in a different form. Before, our differences were emotional. Now, they became practical. For example, when something stressful happened, I wanted to talk it through, slowly, emotionally, carefully. He wanted to solve it, quickly, directly, efficiently. Same situation. Same pattern. But now, the stakes felt higher. Because these weren't just conversations anymore. They were decisions. And decisions affect real life. Now here's where many couples struggle. When pressure increases, people return to their default behavior. That means you go back to what feels natural. What feels safe. What you've always done. And for us, that meant the old pattern could easily return. But something had changed. Not outside. Inside. We were more aware now. So instead of falling into the same loop automatically, we noticed it. That awareness is powerful. Because you can't change what you don't see. Let me give you a simple moment. There was a situation, small but stressful. Something didn't go as planned. My instinct was to talk, to process, to express. His instinct was to act, to fix, to move forward. Before, this would have created tension. But this time, I paused. And I remembered something simple. We are different. And that's not the problem. So instead of reacting, I asked, can we do both? That question sounds basic. But it changed the direction of the moment. Because it didn't reject his way. It didn't ignore mine. It created space for both. And that's what building a life together actually means. Not choosing one way over the other. But learning how to combine them. Now here's the deeper part. In the United States, life moves fast. People value independence, efficiency, and clear communication. There's an unspoken expectation that you handle your responsibilities, stay organized, and keep moving forward. That environment affects relationships. It creates pressure. Not always obvious, but real. So if two people already have different beliefs, that pressure can amplify those differences. And that's exactly what I started noticing. When things were calm, we connected well. But when life got busy, our differences became louder. That's when I realized something important. A strong relationship is not built in calm moments. It's built in stressful ones. Because stress reveals your habits. Your instincts. Your true way of reacting. And if you don't understand each other in those moments, distance comes back quickly. So we started doing something simple, but intentional. We didn't wait for big problems. We paid attention to small ones. How we speak when we're tired. How we respond when things go wrong. How we support each other under pressure. These are the moments that build or break connection. Now here's something that surprised me again. The more we worked as a team, the less we focused on who was right. Because in real life, being right doesn't solve problems. Working together does. That shift, from me versus you to us versus the situation, changed everything. Because now, instead of asking, why are you like this? We started asking, how do we handle this together? That question creates alignment. And alignment creates stability. Now let's connect this back to something practical, your English. In real conversations, especially in American culture, people don't always speak slowly or clearly. They move fast. They expect you to understand context, tone, and intention. And just like in relationships, understanding is not about catching every word. It's about catching the meaning. That's what I was learning, not just in language, but in life. To listen for meaning. To respond with intention. To adapt without losing myself. And that balance is not easy. But it's possible. Now here's the moment that made me realize how far we had come. We faced a situation that would have caused a serious conflict before. Different opinions. Different reactions. Everything was there. The setup was the same. But the outcome? Completely different. We talked. We listened. We adjusted. Not perfectly. But together. And when it was over, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief. Not excitement. Something deeper. Trust. Not just in him. In us. That feeling is quiet. But powerful. Because it means you believe, not that everything will be easy, but that you can handle things together. And that's what building a family really is. Not perfection, but partnership. But even with that progress, one question still remained. A question that started this entire journey. A question I hadn't fully answered yet. Is love stronger than disagreement? I thought I knew the answer. But I wasn't completely sure. Not until I faced it directly. And what I discovered next changed how I understood love, completely. The question I couldn't avoid. Is love stronger than disagreement? I used to think this question had a simple answer. Yes or no. Either love wins, or differences win. But real life doesn't work like that. Because one night, everything we had learned was tested again. Not in a big, dramatic way. But in a quiet moment that felt heavier than anything before. We were sitting together, talking about something important. Not urgent. Not emotional at first. Just important. And slowly, I felt it. That familiar tension. Different perspectives. Different priorities. Different ways of seeing the same situation. It was subtle. But I knew exactly where this could go. Back to the old pattern. Back to distance. Back to silence. And for a second, I froze. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I did. And I wasn't sure if I had the energy to do it again. That's something people don't talk about enough. Growth is not a one-time decision. It's something you have to choose again, and again, and again. Even when you're tired. Even when it would be easier to just react. So in that moment, I had a choice. Go back to what's comfortable. Or stay with what we've been building. And here's the honest truth. Part of me wanted to go back. To defend my point. To explain why I was right. To protect my perspective. Because it's faster. It feels stronger. It feels like control. But another part of me paused. And asked something different. Do I want to be right, or do I want to understand? That question again. Simple. But not easy. So I took a breath. And instead of speaking immediately, I listened. Not to reply, but to actually hear him. And what I heard surprised me. Because underneath his words wasn't disagreement. It was concern. Concern expressed in a different way than mine. That changed everything. Because when you realize someone's intention is not to oppose you, but to protect something they care about, the whole conversation shifts. Now you're not on opposite sides anymore. You're just approaching the same thing differently. That realization is powerful. But here's the part most people miss. You don't see that if you're focused on defending yourself. You only see it when you slow down. When you get curious instead of reactive. So instead of saying, "That doesn't make sense," I asked, "Help me understand why this matters to you." That question opened something. Not instantly, but gradually. He explained more. I listened more. And piece by piece, the tension started to dissolve. Not because we suddenly agreed. We didn't. But because we understood each other better. And understanding creates space. Space removes pressure. Pressure is what usually breaks connection. Now here's the moment that changed everything for me. At one point, he said something simple. Not dramatic. Not emotional. But real. I don't need you to think the same way. I just need to know we're on the same side. That sentence stayed with me. Because it answered the question I had been holding for so long. Is love stronger than disagreement? Love, by itself, is not enough. That might sound uncomfortable. But it's true. Because love without understanding becomes frustration. Love without effort becomes distance. Love without growth slowly disappears. But love with intention? Love with respect? Love with the willingness to understand, even when it's hard? That kind of love is stronger than disagreement. Not because it removes differences, but because it knows how to handle them. That's the difference. And that's what we were learning. Not how to be the same, but how to stay connected while being different. Now let's bring this back to something small, but useful for you. In English, there's a powerful phrase. I see your point. It doesn't mean you agree. It means you understand. That phrase can change conversations. Just like it changed ours. Because people don't always need agreement. They need recognition. They need to feel heard. And when they do, everything becomes easier. Now, I'm not saying everything became perfect after that night. It didn't. We still have moments. We still disagree. We're still different. But something is stronger now. Not love alone. But the way we use love. The way we choose it in difficult moments. And that brings me to the final part of this journey. Because understanding something is one thing. Living it consistently is another. And there's one simple shift that made all the difference for me. A shift that anyone can make. But most people overlook. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. What actually makes love last? So here's the truth I wish I understood earlier. Love doesn't fail because people are different. It fails because people stop trying to understand those differences. That's it. Not a lack of feelings. Not a lack of compatibility. But a slow, quiet loss of effort. And the most dangerous part? You don't notice it right away. It happens in small moments. When you stop asking questions. When you assume instead of listening. When you choose comfort over connection. I've been there. More than once. Thinking, this is just who we are. Maybe we're too different. But now I see it differently. Being different is not the problem. Staying disconnected is. And connection is a choice. Not once, but daily. Sometimes hourly. Sometimes in the middle of a conversation you don't even want to have. That's where it matters most. Now if you ask me today, is love stronger than disagreement? My answer is this. Love is only as strong as the effort behind it. That's the part no one talks about enough. Because effort isn't exciting. It's not dramatic. It doesn't look like a movie. It looks like patience. Like listening when you're tired. Like explaining calmly when you feel misunderstood. Like choosing softness when your instinct is to react. That's real strength. And here's something even deeper. You don't need to change who you are to make a relationship work. But you do need to grow. There's a difference. Changing means losing yourself. Growing means expanding how you show up. I didn't stop having my own beliefs. He didn't stop having his. But we both learned something more valuable. How to hold our beliefs without hurting each other. That skill changed everything. Because now, disagreements don't feel like threats. They feel like opportunities to understand more. Not always comfortable, but meaningful. Now let me share one last moment. Nothing dramatic. Just a normal day. We were talking, laughing, moving through life like usual. And suddenly, I realized something. We were still different. Same personalities. Same perspectives. But it felt peaceful. Not because everything was perfect. But because there was no fear of disagreement anymore. That fear used to control everything. Now, it's gone. And in its place? Trust. Not blind trust. But earned trust. The kind that comes from choosing each other over and over again. Even when it's hard. Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it would be easier not to. That's what makes love last. Not perfection. Not agreement. But commitment to understanding. So if you're watching this and feeling tired, maybe from your relationship, maybe from trying to make things work, maybe from feeling like you're the only one trying, I want you to hear this. You're not alone. And more importantly, it's not over just because it's hard. Sometimes, the hardest relationships teach you the most important lessons. Not about the other person, but about yourself. About patience. About communication. About what love actually means. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this. Love is not something you find. It's something you build. Day by day. Choice by choice. Moment by moment. So maybe the real question is not, is love stronger than disagreement? But, are we willing to grow stronger than our differences? If the answer is yes, then love doesn't just survive. It evolves. And that changes everything. If this story made you think, or reminded you of something in your own life, stay with me. Because this channel isn't just about English. It's about real life, real emotions, and real growth, through simple, honest stories you can actually feel and understand. And maybe the next story will feel a little bit like yours. Here's the part most people don't expect. The biggest change in my marriage didn't happen during a big conversation. It didn't happen after a perfect moment. It happened quietly when I stopped asking, why are we so different? And started asking, how can we grow stronger because of it? And that question is still changing my life today. Because love isn't a final answer. It's an ongoing choice. So if you've ever felt like giving up, if you've ever wondered whether your relationship can survive the differences, maybe this story isn't just mine. Maybe it's a mirror. And maybe, just maybe, your turning point hasn't happened yet. If this story spoke to you, don't just watch and leave. Hit subscribe for more real-life English stories that help you grow emotionally and improve your listening naturally. Like this video so more people who feel the same way can find it. And in the comments, tell me honestly. Do you think love is stronger than disagreement? Your answer might help someone else more than you think. Stay with this channel. Because the next story might be the one that changes how you see your own life.